Hello, good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar. So my name is Deirdre Fulton, a partner at Midas Aviation, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. This is the latest in OAG's series of webinars about the impacts of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Some of you who've joined us before will be familiar with the format where we run through some slides and then we pose your questions to our panel. I'm joined today, as ever, by John Grant, OAG's Senior Analyst, who's been tracking the impacts since the very beginning, which feels like a very long time ago now.
21 weeks, Deirdre.
Yeah. We also have Matt Colling, OAG's EVP of Product Management with us, so welcome to both of you. And I'm pleased to say we've got a special guest joining us today, Mikko Turtiainen, who's VP of Global Sales at Finnair. Mikko heads up the global sales organisation, as well as being responsible for Finnair's brand. Mikko, thank you for taking time out of what must be an incredibly busy time right now, and we look forward to hearing from you later on with some interesting insights, I'm sure. So today, as we've done before with these webinars, we're going to use OAG's data to provide an overview of really what's happening in terms of air capacity and frequency at both regional and country level. And then we'll take a deeper look today at what shifts we're seeing in capacity week by week at the moment and what that means for airline planning horizons. And I'm sure Mikko, as well as the rest of our panel, will have plenty to say about the challenges associated with planning in an airline right now. We're also going to talk about how airlines are rebuilding their networks, and we'll hear a little bit about how Finnair are planning to do that and what some of the challenges, and that understates it really because there are huge challenges in getting back to a sustainable network and connecting traffic volumes just within an airline, never mind a global network. Then, as ever, we'll hope to answer some of your questions, so please do send those in to us using the question box. Everybody will receive a recording of the webinar later today, so don't worry about missing anything. And hopefully we'll be sending a short survey today as well at the end of the webinar, so we'll appreciate it if you take a few moments to answer some questions about your views on travel. So let's jump in to our first slide. So we're looking here at the global picture for flights. Now we've made a bit of progress since a fortnight ago, but not much. 2 weeks ago, we showed a similar picture and flights were 68% down. This week, I think we're 65% down, aren't we, John? But the map's not really, it's not awash with green, is it?
No, it's not like a cricket outfield full of lush green verdant grass, that's for sure. It's full of reds.
I sense you're missing your favourite sport, John.
I am. I think what we're seeing here is a very cautious recovery as airlines ponder the most recent spurt of capacity growth that we had 2 weeks ago now, and the continued lockdowns, absurd quarantine restrictions in the United Kingdom that Michael O'Leary has told us all how to break and adhere to on the golf course, is just frustrating confidence in travellers for demand and to book, because quite frankly you just cannot be sure that the airline is going to operate the service even though they desperately want to. So as you say, we're at 37 million. This time last year we were at 115 million. So you can see the size of the gap. And although the data at the moment suggests that by the end of June we will reach 53 million, as we will come on to later, there is perhaps an expectation, if not an inevitability, that a lot of capacity is going to be taken out of systems now. And we have a very strange dilemma for network planners, where with one hand they're trying to add and think about their networks in July and August, and at the same time they're cutting capacity in June. So it's a very strange market, and it's one that we will probably never see the likes of again in the history of commercial aviation to see so much ebb and flow of capacity.
I think it's this sense, isn't it, that actually, capacity fell off a cliff, didn't it? And the slide that we've been showing just really illustrates that, doesn't it? That everything everything dropped off. And there's a sense that I think we got to the bottom and we're there right now. The journey back up is going to be long, and
absolutely
not any way like this shape, is it? Coming
no, absolutely. It's it's the evolution of mankind crawling off the beach, out of the water, onto terra firma. I mean, Miko, in your case, how quickly did you cut your capacity? I should imagine it was pretty dramatic.
I think the graphs and the lines that you show here, that roller coaster ride down, I think that it was very similar with us, that we did react quickly, and I think that's one of the keys, is to be agile, that you really have to be able to read the environment and make decisions based on that, and be relatively quick. That if you stay and sit and really ponder the matters, that's when that hit will be very big on the financial side. But I did want to touch on the topic that I really like this the previous slide and the title that you had there in regards to signs of recovery, because this is also an interesting topic, that airlines are very data driven, and forecasts and going into the future is at the very depth of airlines in regards to revenue management, and it kind of directs airlines. And right now, this is extremely difficult. So I mean, one of the discussions that we've had at Finnair is that, what are the KPIs that we really need to follow in this environment when we do see those signs of recovery? That is it demand? Is it with discussions with airports? Is it talking with the B2B industry in Finland, in our case, or around the world? Is it search results? That what are people searching on when they go online? I think this is one of the interesting sides, that what is that data set that airlines are using right now to kind of direct in that capacity buildup? That it's a chicken or the egg, that do you put capacity and see do passengers book, and what customer behavior is, or is it the other way around? So I think this is also a kind of a new topic that airlines have had to think about, that what are those KPIs that will trigger actions in regards to capacity buildup or whatever that function is. So I think that's something that's been already a new norm for airlines to define that than how it was done previously.
And interestingly, Miko, we've been seeing Lufthansa almost become totally reliant on tracking search data through the internet to try and anticipate where demand would come back, which is a huge leap of faith that someone is going to move from search to book.
Yeah. When you know that the ratio is there are different metrics, aren't there, about it, but it's not the only indicator. I think I'm fascinated by what you said, Miko, about the agile point, because what you've just described is almost a scenario where you have to put aside everything that you knew about how the industry worked or how you ran your business, in terms of making those forward-looking decisions and flexibly react to the circumstances you find yourselves in. And different businesses will be in different states in terms of their ability to do that, and how agile they can really be, just in terms of their experience, their the data that they have, the systems that they use to track things. I think we're going to really see, and we're starting to see that to some extent, aren't we? Different reactions from the airline community throughout the coming months.
And I would go as far as saying that airline and maybe even overall just company capabilities in regards to data and using real-time data to make decisions, be it internal or external sources, this will give that company or airline a competitive advantage in going forward, that they're able to make in this, this situation, or this environment of unknowns, we'll be able
Yeah.
to at least have that best scenario for decision making. And I think, that if you're at the moment starting to build your, data capabilities, and how do you get the information from your data warehouses to that easily
Yeah.
readable and viewable screen, then you're kind of, you see
You're
that,
halfway there, aren't you?
pack you see that pack in front of you,
Yeah.
you're trying to catch up to them, and that's not a scenario that I like to be in right now. I mean, it's
No. But that is wrapped up. We could take the conversation in a whole other direction here, but that's also wrapped up in your leadership capability, isn't it? The ability of a business or a leader to run a business in crisis is a skill that many are having to learn on the hoof, as they go right now. Because, yeah, I think we said earlier, didn't we, in 20 odd years of being in the industry, we're in new territory.
We are, absolutely. Fascinating.
Okay, let's go back to this one then. So our next slide. Now, we've been showing this one for a number of weeks, and we can see that things are very cautiously starting to move up, perhaps in the right direction. But there's a couple of things going on here, aren't there? So Asia, we've seen a little bit of a step back, haven't we?
We have,
what's going on
Deirdre.
there, John?
Well, 21 weeks. Apparently that's the gestation period for a gerbil. So that tells you how long we've been doing this. But Asia's just moved slightly back, purely because of some capacity changes from Lion Air in Indonesia, that have partly negated the growth that we've seen in India. So that's why we see that situation. Southwest Pacific, I think, is quite interesting, because we've reached a point where we're probably not going to see much more capacity recovery until the bubble is burst in Australia and New Zealand, and international traffic is allowed to recover and services recommence. And I know Air New Zealand have already said, that their ambition for this year is extremely modest in the international market space. But as just one market, it highlights the frustrations when you get things like quarantines and lockdowns, and confusion because of a lack of clarity in guidance that's coming from central governments. And in Europe, of course, we're still languishing with the lowest, the poorest recovery rates around the globe at this moment in time, predicated off the back of airlines like EasyJet and Ryanair, who have got, and Jet2, who've got lots of aircraft parked up, desperate to fly, and just imagine the frustration for an airline like Jet2, who had an ambition to recommence services next week, and have now had to move that back another 2 weeks, because anyone who comes back from a holiday in Europe to the United Kingdom is going to have a holiday at home for 2 weeks, or take their mobile phone on a golf course and answer any phone calls they get from Her Majesty's Immigration Department. So it's fascinating. And of course, China continues to bounce along at reasonably high recovery rates in their domestic market, but less than 5% of their international capacity.
Yeah, and we've got some slides later that'll look at that. Interestingly, if we strip China out of the Asia figure here, the rest of Asia is sitting about -59%. So there's the sort of clear China effect there of recovery in the domestic market, isn't there? Pushing that up. Okay, let's come on to our next.
At Finnair, we've been flying about 5% of our capacity during this March, April, May period, and we'll be ramping that up in July to about 30% of that originally budgeted amount of flying. But I've been asked the question many times that what's the biggest trigger in regards to putting more capacity on the market and flying more? And that very first trigger that also comes from surveys from consumer behavior and what they're thinking about is country borders and understanding this. And you know, when we talk about Europe overall, you know, Finns have been very, you know, used to, you know, pretty much flying anywhere with pretty much your driver's license or what that minimum kind of EU card is that you need to have. But in today's environment where each country has different kind of rules in regards to borders, and some countries are bringing in quarantines and others are taking them out, and you know, you have countries put in different buckets in regards to being green, yellow, or red, and who can go. You know, it's become so much more complex, and I think this complexity also affects the consumer behavior, and this at the end of the day then really affects this Europe number, which, you know, is very difficult. So it's also a very big external that will affect this European number in regards to capacity.
Yeah, and you know, Miko, for Europe coming into the high season, and you know, the amount of revenue and profitability most major European airlines achieve in the next 4 months, which supports their cash reserves and flow during the winter season, to be sitting with, in percentage terms, some nearly 20% or less capacity compared to its nearest, you know, poorly performing market, which is Africa. It's a desperate situation for European airlines. Absolutely desperate.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on to our next slide, where we're going to talk a bit more about this, you know, this sort of evolving situation in terms of what it really means from a sort of planning and capacity point of view. So a couple of weeks ago, we took a look at this data, which is last year's capacity split by domestic and international. What carriers had filed to operate in the week beginning the 25th of May for the weeks ahead, and then the latest position. So you can see the adjustment. Domestically, globally, it's about 45 million seats that have come out in the last 2 weeks over this 6-week period. And internationally, you know, that there's the impact really of all of that uncertainty that we've been describing. 60 million seats have come out globally. And actually, if we look, if we go down a level into look at the regions, you can see the effect really, you know, in Asia, and we've included the Middle East and Africa here. But the big drop is Europe.
It is, and I think Deirdre, a lot of this plays to you know, if you go back to the previous slide, then we all know that the domestic market has been better placed to withstand the impact of COVID-19, and it's in the international markets that we've seen the greatest damage. And then if you look at the regional slides that you have on the next sheet, then it's quite interesting. If you go back to the next slide down, please.
The Asia one, this one.
Yeah, if you go, you can actually see how dramatic these capacity cuts are becoming, and how short notice they are becoming. And
you know, I mean, it's worth reminding everybody that these are weeks, not you know, no,
absolutely.
not
and if you look at, you know, you look at Africa, for example, I know where, you know, it's not in the same size and scale as the Asian capacity, but there is a huge credibility gap in the capacity we see, and what, you know, is what has been changed and will be changed as we go through this. So there are big numbers of seats to come out, and it plays completely to the point Miko was making, that, you know, the airlines are at the mercy of governments, different policies, processes, consumer confidence, and are desperate to start flying again, but are really struggling to find a way through and to create a clarity of messaging to potential.
I think it's the practical logistics, isn't it, Miko, of managing. You know, I'm thinking of China in particular. You know, there was an announcement last week about the plans that would be put in place to manage international flights coming into China in terms of what would happen if there were flights that came in with passengers that had infections, and just grasping that. And then Japan have another set of rules about what might happen, in terms of the requirements that are going to be put on travellers. For an airline, trying to preempt that and manage the logistics of, if you do get a suspension for a week or 4 weeks, or whatever happens, that's really tricky, isn't it?
It's extremely difficult to navigate, with these different rules and restrictions that are about. I mean, each nation naturally and government is looking out for how to get out of this, this present situation and find that road to recovery. But from the airlines, just from the eyes of planning, it is extremely difficult to navigate in this. I'd like to still maybe reflect on this capacity and how this buildup is, and maybe reflect it to how we've at Finnair built the capacity. And as I mentioned, we've been flying about 5% of our capacity that we had originally planned to fly during pretty much all of this Q2, and then jumping into July, where we're going from that 5% of budgeted to about 30% budgeted, and slowly ramping up from there. But even next winter, we'll still be at maximum 70% of that budgeted that we had for winter 2021. So we're really taking it slow, and our view has been that we want to put the network on sale that we truly intend to fly in this environment. And we all know ramp ups are very slow, and we are taking this cautiously, but we do want to bring that element of trust into our network decisions and how we ramp this up, so the customer knows that, hey, this is what Finnair truly intends to fly, and not doing kind of last minute cancellations of flights and so on, depending on what the situation is and how it develops, but truly take a longer, I guess you could call it even a long-term decision in regards to that network, which then goes to end of March 2021, and kind of have these kind of curves. But our curve is very much lower in that sense on how it's built up, as here you look in July and you're only 20-30% down from what was originally kind of in 2019. So you can see there are different approaches in the market on how airlines are tackling this, and Finnair view has been that we want to tackle this to reflect the network that we truly intend to fly in a longer period of time, so the B2C as well as the B2B market have that confidence in regards to this is what Finnair is going to fly. So it's just also the different views on how this is being tackled.
But for Mikko, I mean, I think what you've done is very pragmatic and is what you would expect a Northern European Airlines approach to be. But I think for many airlines, they are still in a situation where they're almost living in hope of a huge spike in demand, rather than understanding the reality and the sentiment. And for many airlines, we have to remember that they furloughed staff and they've cut back on people in every department. And the network planning teams quite frequently have only been looking 2 or 3 weeks in advance and haven't even thought about the summer. And therefore, we've got lots of residual capacity that was pre-planned in January that is still sitting there. And as we go through this, I just can't help but see there will be significant capacity cuts week on week.
I'm just taking it from the consumer's view, that if I was that passenger and trying to book and having how complex it is already just to understand what the different border restrictions and so on are, but then if I still had to question that, okay, is this airline truly going to fly it or not? That's where that's where I'm very happy and proud to be with this Finnair approach, where we are truly trying to push what we intend to fly.
Because I think the damaging effect on our industry of that loss of there's consumer confidence to fly, which is one thing, but then there's the trust piece that you mentioned, around actually if people don't trust that they'll get their money back if their flight is cancelled in good time, you know, or don't trust that what seems to be, you know, the doors are open, let's all get back to traveling, and it then doesn't happen,
I
and you're
guess
back again. It's
trust
really
is the whole
difficult.
thing. Trust is the whole thing, isn't it? You know, so we go from consumers have lost trust in the airlines because we can't give them clarity about what is happening. Airlines have, I think, completely lost trust in leadership and government policy and strategy, because, you know, as has been demonstrated in the UK, they don't seem to have a clue about what they're doing, and are making knee-jerk reactions. And the whole thing is about trust, and that enshrined trust at every stage of the journey, from the booking through to the confidence to reach the airport, the hygiene standards at the airport, in flight, etc., has to be rebuilt.
It does. I think especially at a time when we've had weeks and weeks and weeks of, you know, asking people to stay at home because of the fears about the spread of the virus. And we're now in a situation where, as an industry, we need to say to people, you need to step out now, you need to get back, you need to start traveling again, you need to do all of these things, and you need to trust in both the authorities that they've got the science right, but also trust in airlines and airports to make sure that you'll be as safe as you can be.
Absolutely. So let me trust you to press the next button and go on to the next slide.
Yeah, let's do that. So we just we took the same piece down a level into some country markets, and you know, you can see that India international capacity is just not quite ready to get started again yet, is it?
No, nowhere near that. And you know, there's a long way to go there, of course. But what I think is a little bit interesting about this is that, you know, as of less than a week ago, and indeed even this week, there's still an expectation that from an international perspective, they'll get back to normal types of levels by the 13th of July. Hello, not going to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I think what this illustrates to me is just the different things that are going on. You know, you've got a much more an expectation that something is significant is going to happen in Hong Kong on the week of the 22nd of June, but a much more measured, gradual return, whereas China International is stepping up quite significantly that week. And of course, that's subject to caveats that we alluded to earlier.
As this slide is, you know, from a European point of view, this slide is very much, you know, looking at long haul flights and Asia now. But if I maybe take that one step back and talk more about long haul flights and see again, you know, touching the topic or the word that I said earlier, being agile. This is something that we can see in Asia, where we actually flew, you know, and have flown 400 cargo only flights with our passenger aircraft. So that with the A350s, and we actually even adjusted 2 A330s to take the seats out to take additional cargo on board. And this is an example of, you know, maybe agility in this period of time on what can an airline do to continue operations and even, you know, to an internal, you know, quote that brought a smile to my face, also being in cargo a few years back. But it was said that during this, you know, the past 2 months, cargo has definitely been the rock star here at Finnair, and as that performance has been extremely good, and it's been a kind of, you know, something out of the norm that has, you know, kept the ball rolling here at Finnair. So a shout out to cargo here at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And going forward in the recovery, it's still going to be a very important part with that belly space, isn't it?
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, I think we've been posed an interesting question, Miko, which sort of builds on what we were just talking about a couple of minutes ago. You know, to what extent do you think that the ICAO guidelines and the EASA ECDC guidelines will help to get air traffic moving again? Is there enough there to support the industry in flying again?
this is one that this is a tough one for me because I'm not aware of all the ins and outs on what these guidelines actually, kind of include in that sense. I mean, I think that whatever support can be given in regards to making decisions that at the right point in time do open borders and do allow travel and give that confidence to go back. And I think that support and discussion that needs to be kind of on the table, and having kind of specific discussions on this, and uh, not unclear statements and unclear messages in regards to what can be done and what not. I think this is what we're really hoping for, over the upcoming weeks, is to get clear direction in regards to what can do, and naturally it's a big part of our business on what the borders
Yeah,
and restrictions kind of say.
yeah. I think it, the reality is, as we have seen in the last couple of weeks, and the points that we've been talking about in relation to specific country reaction to how they're going to manage borders opening again, has probably the biggest implication, doesn't it? So if governments are not coordinating their activity and thinking about the joined up piece, then it's going to be really, really tricky to navigate. And I think we'll come on probably to talk about travel bubbles, but there was a period a few weeks ago where we thought travel bubbles might help, might allow us to start really operating again, but we're not sure, are we? We're not convinced that that's the answer, really, in terms of what it helps the industry to do.
No, and we've highlighted before, all bubbles should do really is be burst, and the sooner the better, because they require the volumes of international traffic connecting outside of those particular bubbles, to make the services sustainable. We are a global community, and travel is an important part of it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's come back to one of our regular tables now that we usually look at. So this is the country level version of the regional table, which shows frequency by comparison to the same week last year. And we can see really the China effect, can't we? A little bit of a appearing back again in China. This includes domestic and international. Vietnam sort of continues, but again, a little bit of a step back again.
Yeah, a little bit, but I mean, Vietnam has been extremely successful, and appears at this moment in time to be one of the best case examples of both containing COVID-19 and recovering capacity. Much of it, of course, has been in the domestic market, where I think they've got about 730,000 weekly seats back. So it's not surprising there's going to be some adjustment. There would have been that short-term desire for people to travel, and they're now sort of through that halo couple of weeks, and perhaps waiting for the international traveller to come back so that they can fill those domestic seats. But these are interesting stats. I mean, Hong Kong is still languishing
at the bottom.
Absolutely, and we have Cathay Pacific yesterday with their $5 billion US dollar support program that's now been put in place for them. So it's a tough market. And Miko, unfortunately, many of these are markets in which Finnair are probably the leading European airline.
Agree. I mean, not much more to comment. I mean, Asia for us is it's been very key of our strategy. Our strategy is built with partly with Finland being in that perfect geographical spot to give easy access from Europe into Asia and back. And I mean, this is something that we're following on a daily basis in regards to what kind of feedback we're getting from our teams in Asia, what the markets are talking about, and just seeing what competition is doing. I mean, this goes back to the data and kind of what type of market intelligence you're getting, and this is, you know, really key that you're also getting that right information at the right time so you can make the right
Yeah,
decisions.
absolutely.
Okay, let's go on to our next slide, which is just really the visual representation of some of these, although you might have noticed that we've sneaked Qatar in here. So we can see, before we come to that, you can see in India, we were ready to return, weren't we? And capacity came back in, and then the quarantine was extended in India for a couple of weeks. But hopefully, when we're looking at this a couple of weeks down the line, we'll see that come back up again.
And you know, I can see this being quite a common recovery pattern in markets, going back to that point about the initial demand spurt, and then, you know, waiting for more signs of confidence to come back into the market. It would be fascinating to know what percentage of people traveling in India during that very short and intense spike period in capacity and demand that we've seen were repatriations, urgent needs to visit family, etc., rather than you know, commercial need to travel. So I think it's fascinating, and big shout to Qatar Airways, of course, who have put a lot of capacity back in the last couple of weeks, starting
I think
to reconnect.
70% of their network is back in the schedule. But you know, they need connectivity is what makes these carriers work. You know, we've seen Turkish
Absolutely.
Airlines come back in with a significant amount of capacity as well in the last week, haven't we? And it's about I guess you could say it's a bold step, but it's about getting back into their operational.
Well, yeah. I mean,
plan.
Turkish are very fortunate because they're one of the few markets where there is both domestic and international traffic and substantial amounts of it. And you know, they started their domestic operations first, and they've now started international this week. So there's the potential for connectivity back into those secondary tier 2 cities in Turkey as much as there is to Istanbul and Ankara. So it's beginning to happen.
I haven't talked letters as much as I have over the past months, especially going back maybe 2 months. I mean, the letters U, V, W, and L were so much part of that, you know, conversation when we were just planning out the different kind of scenarios and the ramp ups. And that's actually visualized quite well in this slide with the L's and the U's and the V's and the kind of W's maybe, you know, coming out there in India. But I think this is really, you know, what our CEO Topi Manner has also said, and we've said publicly, that we do see this as you know, us in the industry coming back to 2019 levels in 2 to 3 years time, and you know, that's a best guesstimate as it is right now. But I think going back to, you know, the trust and how you ramp up your network also depends a lot on which letter you've kind of picked, and this might be, you know, some of that rationale, but you know, those letters came to my mind when I did see this slide for the first time, and it really was a kind of a deja vu in that sense.
Yeah. And it's still that unknown, isn't it? You know, if we could predict what this looks like in these markets, we'd be doing really well, wouldn't we? Our crystal ball would have cleared. And
you know, if there are any universities that you could go to next year and you're an aviation student, then you know, the last 3 months have probably given you more data and more opportunity for thesis, theories, and analysis than you've probably had in the last 40 years. So you know, lots of people are going to dwell on this and write learned papers, but the reality is, you know, the industry's lost 400 billion plus US dollars. It's going to make an $84 billion loss this year, if not more. You know, these are not just numbers; these are livelihoods that have been destroyed in the last 3 months.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a look. We've also been tracking cancellations over the last few weeks. And we thought it would be interesting to have a look here at some of the bigger markets, or some of the markets that are further down the road to recovery, the inclusion of South Korea here. Matt, this is interesting, isn't it? This is really your baby, isn't it? So we're seeing domestic looking like it's stable, although 8% is, although we're saying that's stable, it's still considerably higher than the industry norm of 1% pre-COVID. But international looks a bit different, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, very much so. So I think, yeah, we're seeing domestic capacity is increasing fairly steadily in China and South Korea. Slightly more volatility, should I say, in India, and I'll come back to that one in a minute. But we're seeing the cancellation percentages become more managed. Maybe just an indication at the beginning of the China international chart in the bottom left there, where there was some quite substantial spikes in cancellations, and our belief that it was being used as a mechanism by the airlines to manage their capacity. But now it feels very much like the sort of domestic is under control, coming down to nearer more normal levels. South Korea probably back to kind of 2% being slightly high, but kind of more in line with what we would have seen throughout 2019. India, I think, is a fascinating example, and perhaps just to explain some of these sort of peaks and spikes. So in the last slide, we saw a particular spike in India where capacity was put back into the industry, and then the airspace was closed once again, and so that all had to be withdrawn at the last minute. Actually, the earlier spikes on this chart are showing a challenge we've had within OAG managing the data, where there have been other times when Indian capacity has been kept in the schedule until fairly late on, and in these cases this has slipped through to our status data, and we've got to kind of manage that difference between flights being withdrawn from the schedule fairly close to the day of departure, where in the past, pre-COVID-19, that just wouldn't have happened. Airlines didn't do mass schedule updates at such a late stage in the day, but now that's becoming more and more commonplace for us as a company. We're having to manage that flow of information, communicate with the airlines to understand kind of what's going on within the data. Is it telling the picture that the airlines want it to tell, and make sure that we kind of account for it appropriately. So yeah, back to the point of domestic versus international. As with a number of things that we've seen, that the domestic capacity, domestic operations, cancellation rates, all much more managed and under control. I think it's hard to see on these charts, but it's well worth pointing out that the number of flights, the pure count of flights in the domestic side is what is increasing, whereas the international is very small.
Very low, aren't they? Very low.
So that volatility is within a much smaller number of actual operations. But even so, it is clear that the industry is trying to bring capacity back on an international basis, without a huge amount of success, but the domestic is slowly and steadily improving, and it feels like it's under control. So.
Okay, thank you for that, Matt.
My pleasure.
So on the international piece, we thought it'd be interesting just to take a very quick look at the reliance of some of Southeast Asia's country markets on international capacity. So you can see Thailand straight off, more than 50% of capacity is international. And Malaysia is close to that with 48%. Singapore, of course, wholly reliant on international capacity. So, there's a lot of reliance, isn't there, on what we've been talking about on international borders reopening to help kickstart the economies for these countries.
Completely. If you think about Thailand and Malaysia, which are major leisure destinations, particularly Thailand. Until recently, many of the flows to the leisure resorts were through Bangkok, connecting from an international to a domestic flight, and that flow is not there at the moment, and that is impacting hoteliers in all of the islands and resorts. And it's a real frustration. It is this thing about, the industry and the passengers and the capacity is very complex and very much a flow. And without that flow being completely turned on, then we don't see the recovery, and we won't see the recovery that we'd all like to hope for in the coming months. And Miko, from your perspective, much of your Asian network, I know, is dependent on that brilliant hub in Helsinki, where you don't even realize you've landed and taken off again. It's so quick and efficient. But your requirement for European connecting traffic to Asia is vital, isn't it?
I think we've got a nice picture of your network from last summer that just sort of illustrates that point quite nicely.
Yeah, and thanks, John. And I noticed there's a question also from Mick in regards to the hub and how this is working. It's a integral part of Finnair, and we do bridge Europe and Asia, and Helsinki is that home where we've worked very closely over the years with Finavia, the airport provider, and worked towards making that transfer easy and smooth and reliable, and this is something that, and it's a great question, because we've been putting a lot of effort in regards to this, especially looking at the ramp up, where basically our network team has put together a completely new network as of July, and putting that forward. And they've had to look at and speak with Finavia and kind of review how do we go forward month by month, where we're having different scenarios in regards to what happens. And it's an extremely complex kind of discussions, but it's at the very key of our strategy. So we have to take this extremely seriously and make sure that our timings in regards to inbound and outbound flights do work. It does give reliable time to connect, and working from there towards getting up to that 70% of our capacity during the winter. So it's something that it really hits into the areas that we're working on right now, and it's at the heart of going forward.
I think the challenge for an airline like yourself, or any airline contemplating what the new network looks like, is working out which points on the network are the best. Obviously there's demand driving that, there's revenue driving that, but there's all of the other complexity that we talked about, in terms of your ability to operate in and out of those markets.
I mean, you could have a whole webinar on network planning and options for restructuring, whether you go for hub bypass, what is the future of the hub airports. It's a fascinating subject, but never has there been bizarrely as much opportunity now as there probably has been in the last 20 years for airlines to reshape and readjust their networks, and to consider different strategies of hubs and spokes and hub bypasses. So the world we see in 2 years' time will be very different to the one we have at the moment.
I was asked in a previous discussion over the past week or two, that was very much linked with that will the partners of Finnair and airlines in general, would they be different pre-corona versus the recovery, and who would those partners be that either are heightened in regards to closeness in regards to cooperation, and airport is one that I did kind of highlight, and especially Helsinki, our hub, in regards to how it works as a transfer airport. This partnership, as I call it, I call it a marriage, that that in good times and bad, we go forward together looking for solutions, and it's the same here, that we're important to each other, that Finavia to Finnair and Finnair to Finavia. But I also take this one step further, that all the points that we do fly to, the cooperation there with the airports is also extremely important. The Londons, the Manchesters, the Germanys and Asian airports, that how do they work, because there may be slightly different concepts and requirements at these airports. So partnerships and who those stakeholders are, who you really have to kind of discuss deeply with, these also will be different during this recovery time.
And Miko, it's really interesting because that whole partnership concept. Lara's asked us a question about slot waivers for this winter, and in response, you would have to hope that governments are as flexible as they possibly can, and everyone accepts, there is a need to waive the slot, use it or lose it requirements, perhaps for this coming winter as well. I mean, we have a bizarre situation here in the United Kingdom where there is a potential threat to British Airways from a group of MPs who want to take them to or to remove a number of Heathrow slots from them because of the way British Airways have behaved in a wider context. And quite frankly, I don't think there is much support for what British Airways have been doing in recent weeks in the UK public, and that may have damaged their brand. But we need everyone to be as flexible and to be as willing to help each other through this process. So things like slot waivers, airports being flexible in the way that they operate, and the opening hours and the way they restructure. You're absolutely right. This is a marriage, and it could either be a great marriage or it could be a marriage made in hell. And none of us want to be in that space. We've got enough problems to sort out at the moment.
I also noticed another question, that coming up here about fares, and will they be higher or lower? And this is, there are two, some questions that that keep popping up, that from discussions I have within the industry, the opinions are all over the place. Prices is are one, and overall, will it be hotels or airlines or car rentals? What's that overall direction going to be? Is it going to be higher or lower? And it's the market will, at the end of the day, I believe the market will kind of kind of say what the willingness to pay is. So I think that's something that remains to be seen. Another one is it going to be corporate travel starting out, or is it going to be leisure travel? You have these questions and discussions on distribution, and how is consumer behavior going to be in the future? Is it going to be more for purchasing directly from the service provider, or is it going to buying from a first point of contact for buying the whole entire journey through travel agencies and tour operators? There are so many questions that you don't know the answer to yet.
No, you don't. What sort of generation is it? I personally think it's going to be the younger generation who are going to be more confident and open to travel quickly, but then again, do they have the disposable income? Well, based on my personal experience, my daughter knows my bank account numbers, so that's the end of any discussion there. But more seriously, it's going to be fascinating how this all shapes out. We're seeing airlines waiving restrictions on tickets at the moment to try and encourage people to book, and there's a lot of steps being taken along that road. But ultimately, Miko, I agree with you. Airline pricing will always be a function of supply and demand, and at the moment, as we've shown you in the first few slides, there is a lot of supply, but there isn't much demand, so draw your own conclusions.
Thank you. Another question popped up in regards to the fleet, and will this change? Maybe I'll answer this on how our ramp up goes. That a lot of our ramp up starting in July, we're flying a lot with smaller aircraft. So we're using a lot of ATRs and Embraers and smaller aircrafts, where maybe before we've had Airbus 319s and 320s and so on. And I think this is our approach, that we want to we want to get the best possible network out, and if need be, we can upgauge. But I think cost is one feature that airlines are looking at very much under the microscope, and this is one area where also what aircrafts you put into the network when you do start your ramp up we have looked at this, and you know, you have to have, again, flexibility and be agile in regards to answering to demand and what the markets, you know, kind of desire and are ready to pay for. But this is how we've started looking at how we start ramping up when we look at the fleet, which is, you know, part of also that cost environment. So so
you know, Miko, part of will we see the A350 back on Heathrow, Helsinki?
Hey, that's a, you know, that's a great question. You know, I think going back towards that norm, I would love to see, and I'm eager to see the A350 on Helsinki, London, and connecting, you know, Finns through London to the US and UK visitors to Finland and through Helsinki into Asia. And 350 has been a really good product that we're really happy to, you know, to have flown. And I hope to be back on the 350 flying into London, and I hope so.
Yeah, there's an interesting question here, sort of going on about taking that slots discussion slightly further. You know, how can airports be flexible when airlines don't know what they're doing? Very good point. Well, we've discussed that ad nauseum. But I think you know, it goes on to say removing the 80-20 rule reduces flexibility, protects the legacy carriers. And stops low-cost carriers moving into some airports and some markets. So we've already seen that some airlines have had to make some commitments and concessions around slot access and availability. Lufthansa in Frankfurt and Munich, but you know, I think we have to overcome the low cost versus the legacy situation at the moment. It is the airline industry, it is the aviation industry, and we just need to get some real, need to move on from green shoots to solid recovery, I think. And you know, low cost carriers have moved into major European hub airports. I think of Amsterdam as a great example, with its own facility for low cost carriers, and you know, they've done a tremendous job in building capacity and traffic. So I think there's room for everyone.
I think, though, it's becoming clear, isn't it, that we're going to come out of this with less airlines than we came into it. You know, we've had quite a few questions about how many airlines do we think might not survive this crisis, and I think this summer period, particularly for Europe, is really critical, isn't it, in terms of,
it is,
if we can get airlines flying again, then the cash reserves can start to recover.
They've got 3 months. They've got 3 months, many of these, to build up any sort of cash reserves and demonstrate to financiers that they do actually have a, you know, a reasonable business plan and a path forward through the winter of 2020 and 2021. But you know, we've seen chapters 11, we've seen chapter 77s, we've seen casualties, we've seen all sorts of things, and there are, every week there are maybe 5 or 6 airlines that, you know, send a message to OAG saying we're no longer going to be flying, and many of them are very small, and we probably wouldn't even recognize their networks. But it's been a great shakeout, and maybe there was a need for.
You could argue, couldn't you, that was long overdue. In
absolutely. Although of course one of the airlines that, you know, you sort of think must finally have reached the end of its life expectancy, continues to go to prayer on a Sunday in Rome and survive, which is staggering.
And you know, this plays into the whole piece, doesn't it, about government support, and to what extent state aid is perhaps propping up something that might have been on the way down anyway. You know, we could spend a whole webinar talking about that particular situation.
And we have before with Jeremy Robinson, where we've you know, spent a long time about state aid, and he's written an excellent piece what he puts on LinkedIn that some people might be interested in reading, about fairness and level playing fields at the end of the day. You know, which allows me to reference Yeovil Town's 1 in 6 slope on their football pitch. But we, you know, we're in a,
I think you lost a lot of people with that, John.
I'm sure I did. But you know, we're just in need of some leadership and direction, I think, and you know, some positivity. Airlines are creating positivity.
There's an interesting question here from Joanna Bailey. Do you think Europe missed an opportunity to be more united in its response? Has the reaction across Europe made things worse, made the impact worse for the industry?
Yeah, I privately replied to Joe and said, really, tongue in cheek, yeah, of course it missed an opportunity, but what would we have expected to get it right? We would have been surprised. You know, it's been, the amazing thing is the degree of unilateral support and funding that has been provided. You know, maybe, just maybe, if we were going to create a level playing field at the end of this, the European Union would have been best served to have created some very quick principles about funding and support that could be provided by states to their domiciled airlines, rather than, you know, with respect, allowing everyone to go off and cut their own deals and negotiate their own conditions. We could have taken account of, you know, carbon offsets, environmental issues, sustainability, but, you know, we've got one government that's essentially said, oh, please give up 6 slots at Frankfurt and Munich. Really? You know, that was not worth very much. Another one saying, please stop doing quite as much domestic flying as you have been doing and putting people on trains.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very fragmented response that we've seen.
Okay, I'm conscious of time, so we've reached 9 o'clock. We've probably got time for some final thoughts from our panelists before we wrap up. If you do have to duck off the webinar now, as I said earlier, you will receive a recording, so you won't miss any final snippets of wisdom that might come from the panel. Miko, any final reflections from you?
Yeah, well, thank you, and you know, thank you for the hour, and I think my main thoughts are that you know, taking these first concrete steps towards that recovery is a very positive thing, and I think that we have to drive that positivity, you know, going forward, and one way of driving that positivity is through building trust, and that's something that I think here at Finnair we're very much, you know, putting efforts in showing trust towards the industry, be it the B2B, the B2C, or our partners out there, and one day at a time. But we are on that road to recovery, looking at the situation right now. So with those thoughts, you know, from my side, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us today. John, any final snippets you want to share?
No, just, you know, we are making progress. We are coming out of it, and someone has asked me to be nice to Alitalia, so maybe I'll take a Italian coffee and ponder that thought. But yeah.
Well, you are hoping to get to Italy in a few weeks'
I am hoping to get to Italy. So. Yeah, so I better be nice. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's all we've got time for this morning. If we haven't answered or managed to answer your question during the webinar, we'll do our best to reply and come back to you in the coming days. As we said, a recording of the webinar will be coming out to everybody, and we've referenced some links throughout that we've put in the chat, so hopefully you've been able to keep track of those. Remember that you can, the data that we've covered, the regular pieces that we referred to, are available on OEG's website, and you can sign up to the blog to get those popping into your inbox every week, or you can visit the page and download the data as you need. Thanks again to the panel this morning. Thanks to all of you who've given up your time to listen. And we'll hopefully see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.